be able to, oh, sorry. Will I be able to get a recording?
It'll be going on to the cloud and it'll be available, so.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay, and I am probably going to at some point log out and attempt to regain access through my phone.
Okay, are you using Sue Woodling's?
No, Sue Woodling is a friend of mine.
Oh, so that's you're ready to go, because it's coming up, started screen sharing. So I'm not sure why that I'm seeing that message, so.
Maybe somebody has put it so that the audience can, in the settings, it says if the audience can share screens or not.
Oh, so, yeah.
And you should not let them be able to share screens because they will bomb.
No. Only, okay, that wasn't set. Okay. All right, so now only host. All right, and it's 6:30, so I do want to admit everybody.
Yeah.
So people, we're admitting all our participants, and we're going to get started now. All right, well, welcome everyone to a wonderful session tonight on behalf of the Greensboro Public Library and the City of Greensboro. We have an incredible session ahead of us and some wonderful participants. I'm going to turn this over to Trina, who you may not be able to see, but she's going to tell you more about our program. Go ahead, Trina.
Hello, thank you so much. I apologize for my technical difficulties here. Thank you all for joining us here with Juneteenth, Freedom, Hope, and Song. This is a program brought to you by the Vance Chavis Library. It's a branch of the Greensboro Public Library Department. We're working together with the City of Greensboro. And today we have with us Mr. James Shields and Ms. Sage Chioma. James Shields has led educational tours of Guilford's own Underground Railroad Trail and has shared stories and songs of enslaved Africans who sought freedom. This year, Mr. Shields was recognized during an annual alumni awards ceremony for his 20 years leading Bonner Center for Community Service at Guilford College. His work also merited the college's Alumni Excellence Award in 2016. Sage Chioma holds an undergraduate degree in Community Justice and Policy Studies and a graduate degree in Public Health. She has taught scene study as a conflict mediation tool in New York City schools. She's the author of 2 plays, Embracing the Miracle and Tapestry, and is the author of the collection Earth is a Mother's Hood, Celebrating Our Earth and the Feminine Divine. At the end of this session, we will have a 15-minute question and answer session. But right now, I'm going to turn things over to Mr. James Shields.
All right. Walk with me, Lord, walk with me. Walk with me, Lord, walk with me. While I'm on my tedious journey, walk with me, Lord, walk with me. Thank you so much. And welcome everyone to our time together. We're really happy to be here for Juneteenth. Juneteenth is and has been since 1865, a very important time for us. And we're very pleased that this time is getting more attention now. And this idea of African Americans looking at this space, this time as a day of jubilee, as a day of celebration, as a day of celebrating us. And what I want to do today and because there's been so many other people talking about the Juneteeth in particular, but I thought it would be really cool to connect the local Underground Railroad history to the idea of Juneteenth and the idea of freedom. From the enslaved Africans that were brought to this continent in 1619 to those in Galveston, Texas, who were the last to hear the Emancipation Proclamation, freedom has always been valued. Freedom has always been expected, and freedom was always known, even to the enslaved, as a God-given right. So what did it mean to be enslaved? Of course, we know that to be enslaved, at least in America, meant you lacked freedom of movement. Most places, especially if you lived on a farm, you didn't get to move around a lot. You had to stay kind of in your locality. Frederick Douglass, who had the opportunity to, if you want to call it an opportunity, to live in a city, Baltimore, and to also live on a farm. And he noted that living in the city, he had so much more mobility, and he felt like he was as free as he could be living in the city. Cruel, unusual, and quite frankly, sick punishment that was perpetrated upon enslaved Africans. Once again, going back to Frederick Douglass, he's kind of my man, and he talks about in several cases where either himself severely beaten, he talks about an aunt that was severely beaten. He talks about a sibling, Henny Bailey, who was severely beaten for no reason. This was part of being an enslaved African on the American continent. The breaking up of families, right? We know that many families were broken up. We know that many families were sold, sometimes from the same auction block. And you could see your brother, see your sister, see your mother sold away. We know that many people who did escape enslavement, instead of seeking freedom, they sought their family. And so, a lot of times people talk about how this idea of family within slave culture didn't make sense. Well, it made total sense. Why would we not value family like anyone else? And of course we did. So how does this connect to the Underground Railroad? Well, first of all, the Underground Railroad in and of itself was all about freedom. It was all about getting out of that peculiar institution that we call slavery. It was all about becoming free. Most of us know about the famous trips of Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and others. And one of the first things that they would say was how this feeling came upon them just crossing a line, knowing that on this side of a river, I was a free person, whereas on the other side, I was enslaved. I was less than human. And also we know from Harriet Tubman, though, of course, she could not enjoy that freedom because she knew that there were people left back who were also enslaved. And so, she went back to get her family, and she went back to get others. But that's a whole nother talk, right? So the Underground Railroad here in Guilford County is a very important piece of the Underground Railroad history in our country. Members of the Religious Society of Friends, better known as the Quakers, settled in this area, Guilford County, Alamance County, in the mid-1700s. Many of these people were from places like Nantucket. These were people that already came with a pretty anti-slavery fervor that they brought to this area. And I do want to quickly acknowledge that this land that the Quakers found, right, was land that had previously been occupied by members of the Sara tribes, members of the Kawaii tribes. And we think it's important to make that acknowledgement before we start talking about enslaved Africans and white folks and Quakers. That's really a crucial piece that we think is important as we tell this tale. Members of the Religious Society of Friends, as part of their moral standing and moral thinking, believe that the light of God is in every person. And if that's true, then certainly we don't enslave other people. And the Quakers believed in that. And so when they came to Guilford County, when they came to Alamance County, settling in Cane Creek, which is in a snow camp, settling here in Greensboro, setting up New Garden Friends meeting, just down the road in Jamestown, Deep River meeting. These were meetings that began to work together when the Underground Railroad was finally started. Addison Coffin, Levi Coffin, the Coffin family, these are names that we hear when we talk about the Underground Railroad and Guilford County. The Coffin family came to this area. They started working on the Underground Railroad. Little Levi Coffin, how did he decide to make anti-slavery his vocation? What happened to him? When Levi Coffin was 7 years old, he's working on a road with his father, probably what they call the Salisbury Road. And he was working on a farm, which is what we now call the campus of Guilford College. And there was a coffle of slaves coming down the road. This is early 1800s, 1807, something like that. And so they had seen enslaved Africans before, but they had never seen coffles of slaves, chains of slaves, people coming through, headed farther south. This is the beginning of the 1800s. We're starting to clear out the South. We're starting to clear out Mississippi and Tennessee and Alabama. And we're starting to clear out those native tribes that were there and starting to bring, we need more slaves to come in. And so you're starting to see these coffles of slaves coming through North Carolina, headed south. They stopped for water, and Levi's father asked the group, "Why are you being chained up like this? Like, what's going on?" And one of the men said, "We've been taken away from our families, and we're never going to see them again, and we're being sent down south." Levi, 7 years old, thought to himself, what if father was taken away from us? How would we feel? And so there was a sense of empathy with Levi. Levi understood that this was not right. He understood, as he connected this to what he had been taught as a Quaker, what he had been taught as a Christian. He understood that this was not right. And so he began to work on the Underground Railroad with his uncle, Addison Coffin, with other people, and they started doing the work. They also started working with a man named Saul. Saul was an enslaved African. He worked for a man named General Hamilton, and so sometimes he was known as Hamilton Saul. Saul would see the coffles of slaves coming through, and he would get word back to the coffins, or he would help people that were coming through the woods that we now call the Guilford Woods. One of the first people who kind of came through the Underground Railroad, or one of the people that was helped, was a man named Benjamin Benson. Benjamin Benson was on one of those coffles of slaves. And he was able to get word to Saul that in fact he had been kidnapped. He was a free man from Delaware and he had been kidnapped. And so Saul got word back to the coffins. The coffins tried to catch up with the chain gang, but the chain gang had already gone down the road. But that was not going to deter the Quakers, because they was like, we have to, this is a wrong that we have to try to right. And so they followed this man farther south. They were able to take him to court, and the court ruled that he had to not only produce Benjamin Benson, but he had to set him free. This was a huge court ruling because usually the courts did not rule for people who were African Americans, whether you were free or not. Later in 1819, one of the first men to go through the Underground Railroad was a man named John Demery. Up until this point, the farmers had been seeing the different enslaved Africans seeking freedom coming to the Guilford Woods, and they would show up with corn and food and whatnot, but there was really no organization. John Demery was a man who was manumitted, or he was officially freed by his slave master. And he decided to move to Guilford County because he knew that Guilford County was a very favorite spot for free Black people. Going into the 1800s or so, you had roughly about 300 free Black people that lived in the county, and that number will double, almost triple, as we go closer to the Civil War times. When John Demery came to Guilford County, he settled, had a house, had a family, and the heirs of his former master, when the former master passed away, decided, we're going to go to Guilford County and get our property back. And so they came to Guilford County, they looked for John Demery, they found John Demery, burst into his house, and John Demery calls out to his daughter, go get Mr. Coffin, go get Mr. Coffin. And so she runs and she gets Mr. Addison Coffin. Mr. Coffin comes and they burst into the room. The Quakers won't admit it because they are pacifists, right? But there was a little melee going on, and they were able to subdue the two heirs that were trying to get John Demery. And while that was going on, the daughter was able to untie John Demery, and they ran to the Guilford Woods. And from that point, they were spirited off up to the north or northwest, where they went into Indiana. So John Demery was one of the first people to kind of come through the Underground Railroad. And after that, the Quaker farmers realized we need to connect. We need to share our resources. We need to share our information. We also need to connect with our brethren up north who have money. In order to get people to freedom, it costs money. And so they would do that as well. As I mentioned earlier, there were many free Black people that lived in Guilford County. One of my mentors, Dr. Adrian Israel, is working on that very subject, the Black people that lived in Guilford County. Where did they live? Who are they? What are the family names? We believe that there was a small area of free Blacks that lived in what we now call the Horsepen Creek area close to the airport. So that would be on the edge of what were probably Quaker farms. And so once again, we are beginning to do more of that work. Freedom, once again, freedom is certainly not free. And before the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, even if you were free legally, you could be kidnapped, like Benjamin Benson. You could be enslaved. You could be beat. You could be taken for your money, and you could not sue. You could not take out a warrant against a white man. You could not testify against a white man. You technically could not own land. But Quakers did sell land to free Blacks who were here. So how were they protected? Well, now know through the digitizing of slave deeds here in Guilford County that there were actually many Quakers, several Quakers, and some Quaker meetings or churches that actually owned slaves. Now you're saying, okay, this guy just told me Quakers don't believe in slavery. But going back to what I just said, before the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, if you were Black in this country, no matter where you lived, you had you had no rights. And so how was the best way in the South, in a slave state, to protect a man, a black family, was for them to be property, because then you had laws to protect you. And so these were people who were called Quaker-free Negroes, because people understood that because they were technically owned by Quakers or owned by a meeting, that they were in fact not enslaved, but they were actually free to work, free to live, free to move about however they wanted. One of the things I want to mention too, before we wrap up and before we move forward with questions and discussion, a couple of things. One, we believe, without going into detail, because we actually teach a class on this that goes, there's so much about the Underground Railroad that that we would love to share, but we certainly can't share in just this small amount of time that we have. But we think it's important for you to understand that the Underground Railroad, as much as I've talked to you about the Quakers, the Underground Railroad as a whole was an interracial enterprise. Many enslaved Africans who used the Underground Railroad never saw a white face. Many of the main people, like for example here in Guilford County, Saul, who doesn't get a lot of press in the writings of Addison Coffin and Levi Coffin, though he does get a mention, we believe that he played a pretty major role. We believe that there were other free blacks that lived in the area who played a major role. But I hope you can appreciate that it wouldn't make sense for that to be documented. It wasn't something that you wanted to brag about. Even Levi Coffin, when he wrote his reminiscences after the Civil War, he was hesitant. It was Reconstruction, especially here in the South, and you really did not want to make people mad by kind of bragging about what you did on the Underground Railroad. And so he had to be coerced into even writing his memoirs, which is really good for us because it gives us a lot of information, a lot of leads on what was going on here in Guilford County. But the names that we know, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Denmark Vesey, John Demery, Benjamin Benson, Henry Box Brown, these are just some of the names that we know. These are people that played major roles on the Underground Railroad. These are people who, those and so many unknown people who helped us get to freedom. This freedom that we understood to belong to us. We also know that as enslaved Africans, it was hard to let people know what your grievances were. You couldn't just go up to a slave master and say, man, you're working me too hard, or I'm tired, or I'm hungry, you need to give me more food. You couldn't do that. But you could sing songs. You could sing songs that were spiritual. You could sing songs of support. You could sing songs that kind of went against the master. Wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. And of course, the master's sitting up saying, that nice. My people singing spirituals and whatnot, when in fact, they were singing about freedom. They were singing about connecting at the water. They were singing about the water being troubled, and out of that trouble would be freedom. They would also sing about that great getting up morning, right? In that great getting up morning, fare you well, fare you well. In that great getting up morning, fare you well, fare you well. I say, preacher, fold your Bible, fare you well, fare you well. I say, preacher, fold your Bible, fare ye well, fare ye well. Once again, the master doesn't even know. I'm telling you to your face, I'm leaving. I'm getting out of here. Once again, though, we also understood that this was freedom belonged to us. Didn't my Lord deliver Daniel? Daniel, didn't my Lord deliver Daniel? Daniel, why not me? So we understood, or we gleaned from the Bible that was presented to us by our enslavers. I think we saw a different story. And so we connected to Wade in the water. We connected to the children of Israel. When Israel was in Egypt land, let my people go. Up so hard they could not stand. Let my people go. So they connected with the children of Israel. They connected with Ezekiel and the wheel. They connected with this idea of movement and freedom. And they were able to talk about that through song. Songs were very important, and these are songs that would serve us well, and they serve us well today. When you think about the civil rights movement, or even before the civil rights movement, Fisk Jubilee singers that were singing those old songs and keeping those songs alive. Out of that coming our blues. Once again, being able to air our grievances, but doing it through blues, through jazz, through R&B, hip hop. Think about songs like This Is America. You know, this guy's telling us straight up grievance about what it means to be here, right? So these songs are important to us. So real quickly about Juneteenth before we end and start our conversation. And I know that a lot of you we've been talking a lot about this today, but of course we know that June 19th, 1865 was when those last enslaved Africans in Galveston, Texas heard the Emancipation Proclamation. They heard General Granger's order. The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that of employer and hired labor. The freedmen are advised their present homes and workforce. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts, and they will not be sorted in idleness either there or elsewhere. And that was the general order, number 3. Many of the people tested this new employee relationship by staying on their farms, which of course we know for most of them turned into situations of sharecropping, which kind of left you in a hole and became slavery in another name. Many of those people left Texas to find family who might have been sold to neighboring states, Arkansas and Oklahoma and places like that. Where's my family? Yes, I'm free, but I don't have my family. And so people were looking for their families. We know that Juneteenth is the holiday marking the end of slavery in the United States. But it's also a time for us to celebrate. It's also a time for us to think about the ancestors and what they did and how they continue to inspire us. I kind of get in my feelings when I saw the other day somebody had a t-shirt and it said, you know, we are not our ancestors. I get what you're saying and I understand that. But to me, it also is kind of a slap in the face because, you know, here in 2020, We can talk a lot, but we can't say, you know, have you ever heard that person say, well, if I was back there in 1865 or 18 blah, 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 I would have done this, that, and the other. No, you wouldn't. You would have done what those folks did. They did what they had to do so that we're here today. So if there's anything to remember about Juneteenth, that from 1619 to today, it has always been about survival. It's always been about freedom. And at some point, you have to sacrifice some things, and you may not see it, as Martin Luther King said about the mountaintop. I may not get there with you. And our ancestors understood, trust, when they were in those cotton fields, they didn't think freedom was coming next week, but they thought about us. We are their dream. And that's why Juneteenth is so important. The last thing I want to say about Juneteenth is it was very odd in that they did not find out until 1865 that they were in fact free. There are many reasons that have been put forth as to why. Some say that they weren't told simply because we wanted to get the crops in. Some say that they weren't told because being on the outer edge of the Confederacy, the Union Army, until General Granger got there, did not have a presence in Texas. Many slave owners in the neighboring states, like in Arkansas and other places, actually, they moved, they immigrated to Texas because they knew they could take their slaves to Texas. I think I read over 250,000 slaves were moved from neighboring states as the Confederate Army encroached and they went to Texas. And so those were the numbers of people. So you think about the number of people that were freed on Juneteenth. We're talking hundreds of thousands of slaves. I think that's really, that's all I really want to say at this point, because I want to save time for us to have a conversation and any wisdom that's in the group. We have a nice group, and I want to hear from other people. And I'm going to pass the baton.
Thank you so much for that, James. Get my audio on. Sorry, that. And I am. Thank you so much for that, James. That was very enlightening. We are now going to hear from Sage Chioma, and Sage has written a poem that she's going to deliver for us this evening. It is called Can America Heal from Racism? Sage?
This poem begins with an epigraph. Some of us do not have the luxury of viewing history as simply a series of events. Ruby Sales. Can America heal from racism? We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We know these words were meant for only a few. Historical truth-telling, the antidote for what ails us, and it's long overdue. Slavery, Black codes, 100 years of lynching, segregation, Klans, reign of terror, poverty, the war on drugs and police brutality, etched in America's collective psyche, Black bodies hanging from Southern trees. We've all heard about the new Jim Crow. He done changed his name to James Crow Esquire, yet we seldom take the time to inquire, can America heal from racism? Some never think to question those things given at birth. They just pass them on to their children, although their family heirloom is a tapestry with looting and violence woven into every single stitch. We all know about Birmingham, Mississippi, goddamn, Tulsa, Wilmington, and Rosewood. The Confederate flag, a symbol of the blood shed on American soil. For many, a symbol to honor the heritage of their forefathers. And for the other, a bullseye on the back of every Black man, woman, and child in America. For both, it triggers unresolved trauma, enacted each and every day, passed on and held in our nation's DNA. A symbol that belongs in museums at best and breeds contempt towards those who believe they are one above the rest. What's good for some at the expense of the whole has finally taken its toll. So I ask, can America heal from racism? For people of color, history is more than a series of events, but patterns of maladaptive behaviors being passed off as the norm. As with any pathology, you must examine patterns thoroughly to adequately diagnose. Emmett Till wasn't much older than Tamir Rice and not much younger than Mike Brown. 4 little girls killed in a church and a 13-year-old boy, Virgil Lamar Ware, killed on the same day, September 15th, 1963. Can America heal from racism? White fragility, we accepted long ago. It's white rage triggered by Black progress causing such civil unrest. It's time for those who classify themselves as white to stop looking out of the window and look into the mirror, and what will they see? The fabricated social construct of white supremacy, a form of self-hatred, guilt, and shame projected onto others, rooted in 400 years of cognitive dissonance. At some point, even you should want to be free. Can America heal from racism? Not without atonement. White supremacy, a system with only one purpose, to dominate and control. White supremacy demands people of color to be complicit in their own demise by suffering silently. There's a lot to be said for people who are continually seeking equality instead of revenge. Time and time again, Black people have proven they can forgive the unforgivable. That should be enough to build trust that America's being called to repent for its original sin. Can America heal from racism? Not without atonement. Atonement, a form of justice that restores, transforms, and heals. Atonement, acknowledgement of all transgressions and the harm done. Atonement allows those harmed to be heard and thoroughly examine the extent of the wound. Atonement allows the conscience of the offender to be cleared and absolve them of guilt so they can be brought back into the fold of humanity. You see, atonement opens the door to an amends never made. Atonement requires us to see through the lens of the other, because what we can do together, before we could never. There's a new generation emerging. They're tasked to create a sane and just world where everyone feels good about who they are and each person's contribution equally valued. They are Black, brown, white, red, and yellow. They are Christian, Muslim, Jew, Buddhist, interfaith, and Hindu. They are LGBTQ, hetero, pan, asexual too. They are young, old, and from every corner of the globe. The Rainbow Tribe has arrived, bearing the ancient wisdom of Africa. Ubuntu, I am because we are. Breath, a divine birthright endowed by the Creator. Take a deep breath and ask yourself, can America heal from racism?
Thank you, Sage. That was wonderful.